guys, Tiffany and Leon here, and welcome to Our Organic Life. So you guys asked for it, so I'm going to show you how we ferment our chicken feed. Now, there are countless benefits to fermenting your feed, and it's not just for chickens, ducks, geese. We actually have even fermented our horses' feed. And some of the benefits is, of course, probiotics. It really helps give that. It really helps them build beneficial bacteria in their gut. The probiotics, of course, also come in hand with it, and and it also kind of creates a living environment in the feed. From my understanding, it also creates new vitamins, specifically vitamin B, like riboflavin, niacin, things like that in your feed, which of course benefits ducks. So the only downside to fermenting feed is, now you can do it. I personally prefer fermenting whole grain feeds. We use a New Country Organics feed, and a lot of the grains are crushed, but they're mostly whole. We actually just switched to a turkey grower for the turkeys and the meat chickens finishing out, but because it had a higher protein count. But you can ferment pellets. I just note that it's going to become a mash. It just becomes basically a slop mash, which is not a bad thing. The chickens are going to love it regardless. So it can be done with pelleted and whole grain. Whole grain just holds up better. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead. You're going to need a food grade bucket. We get ours from Tractor Supply. It's probably the cheapest place that I've found. I'll share a link down below on where you can get that. So I'm going to go ahead and take our feed, and we're feeding the broiler chickens, our chicken nuggets, and they're eating a lot right now. They're in the end stages. It's almost time for us to harvest them. So they're eating a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and do 3 scoops. Now, another cool thing about fermenting feed is that because the feed is soaking up the water and fermenting, it kind of becomes alive in a sense with the beneficial bacteria, but it also becomes softer. The nutrients become more available. So with the feed being more palatable, softer, and the nutrients being more readily available, the chickens aren't going to eat as much. So it actually can cut your feed bill or your feed cost for feed consumption by as much as 20 to 30%. So I've definitely noticed that when I'm fermenting feed, the feed definitely tends to go a lot further than if I was just feeding them dry feed. So I'm going to go ahead and do 3 scoops, and you can do however many scoops. You can kind of test it out and see. Just know that the feed is going to almost double in size in a sense, depending upon the feed that you're using. So alright, so we got our feed. We're going to go ahead and go outside and get this filled up with water. Alright, so I've got my buckets here. This is the bucket that I just prepared to put the feed in. I haven't added any water yet, but this is the feed that's been fermenting for 24 hours now. And so I kind of just want to show you, just in the 24 hours, the difference between the two. I'm going to go ahead and stir it up. So you can see some bubbling here, and that's what you want. Whenever it starts to bubble, that means that the fermentation process is working. So I'm going to use this to pick this up. So if you can look at the feed now, compared to what it looked like before, I mean, just look at that difference. That is such a huge difference. So I'll go ahead and, just for simplicity's sake, look at that. That is, like, I mean, look at how much the feed changes just from soaking it. That is just insane. I mean, if that's not a seller right there, I don't know what is. I'm so glad that I learned this trick, because it's definitely made a huge difference in their feed. And another thing with certain feed mills, you can see how there's like a lot of powder, and it's just from the refinery, from whenever they crush it, some of the stuff gets left behind. Well, because this is wet, it sticks to it, so none of it gets left behind. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and add the water to our dry feed. So just kind of stir it up, make sure that it's incorporated. And you basically want to make sure that the grain is completely submerged in the water. You want to break up any clumps that formed. Just make sure that there's no air pockets and the feed is completely submerged in the water. You're going to want to at least let it soak for 24 hours just so that it can kind of soften up. But the best way to do it is to let it ferment for 2 to 3 days before you feed it to them. So you don't have to have 2 buckets. I normally just run 1 bucket. I just did the 2 buckets just so I could show you guys kind of side by side of what it looks like when you first start versus what it looks like 24 hours later. They don't get like substantially more swollen. It just kind of becomes more nutritious from there. So you do want to make sure that you're stirring it at least once or twice a day, just to, because as it ferments, it's going to create bubbles. It's going to aerate a bit, or so to speak, and that's the fermentation happening. So you want to make sure you're stirring it up just so that it kind of loosens those bubbles, and you'll even see some bubbles rising to the top. But then, of course, 24 hours, you'll start to see stuff starting to sink to the bottom, and it'll settle. And then I use a mesh strainer, and I just scoop it out, and it strains it out, and we're all good to go. Let's go ahead and get these guys fed. I love this stuff. They're going crazy in the background. I swear I feed them. They act like I never feed them, but they're the Cornish cross. They're just eating machines. They just eat and eat and eat and eat. I guess that's just what they were bred to do. Put on as much weight as possible. So you want to make sure you're straining off as much of the liquid as possible. I know, guys. I hear you in the background. I got your food coming. And there you go. It just broke. That's how heavy this feed is. Ready for the mayhem? Oh, hi. Whoa! 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 No, get back in there. All right. God, they're crazy. Here, Magnolia. Ducks. Magnolia. Here you go, mamas. There you go.
How do you know the mamas? How do you know those ones are mamas?
I was calling Magnolia mamas.
Oh. Hi, Magnolia. Mama? You wanna breed in the Magnolia?